Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Marketplace Conference, San Francisco 2019. Woohoo! We have an amazing group here, and I'm excited to welcome you all. First of all, a little bit of introduction and brief history of the conference. My name is Daniel Hoffer. I am Managing Director at Autotech Ventures. We are one of the co-organizers of the conference. Autotech Ventures is a venture capital firm focused exclusively on ground transportation investments. We invest globally. I'll provide a little bit more background on us a little bit later. But the conference has a history of its own. This is only the second conference of its kind here in San Francisco. The first one was approximately a year ago. And it is an annual conference, so we're expecting to do another one next year. But we also had a conference in Berlin in November, and so we have a structure where we alternate between San Francisco and Berlin, so 2 marketplace conferences per year somewhere in the world. This is the third of its kind, and this is the largest in San Francisco. Last year we had a little over 200 people attending. This year we sold out with over 425 people registered to sign up. So great turnout. I expect people will be coming in throughout the day, even more than we have in the room right now. And people have flown in from all over the world to be here. So we have folks from Germany and Austria and Australia and South America and of course all over the US. So it's a very diverse group of both, Singapore, a bunch of folks from Singapore, very diverse group of both speakers and attendees, and hopefully they will bring their varied perspectives from around the world to share with all of you, so that we can all learn from each other and increase our global perspective ourselves. I'm pretty excited about that. Creating something of this scale is very much a team effort, and I want to take a moment to thank all of the many people who have been participating. First of all, to the other co-organizing venture firms, Battery Ventures and Speedinvest, and we'll hear from both of them shortly. And then also the event organizing team, which is called Make It Mariko. Is Gina around? She's not in here right now? She's in the back, okay. Well, the Make It Mariko team is our event organizing partner, and they've done a phenomenal job of pulling all this together. There are a lot of logistical details, and they've done a great job making it happen. And also the Speedinvest team dedicated some resources as well, and I'm grateful to those folks too. Of course, in addition, it couldn't be done without our sponsors. So we have a number of fantastic corporate sponsors: Silicon Valley Bank, great bank in the area, Yapstone, NASDAQ. NASDAQ, by the way, will be posting some interviews and photos from today on the NASDAQ Tower in Times Square in New York. So that's a little perk of partnering with NASDAQ. They're a great partner. Native, Cooley the law firm. I just did a deal with Cooley, had a great experience. DLA Piper, another great Silicon Valley law firm. And so just to give you a quick overview of the day and the format of the day, the length of the talks are about 20 minutes each, with about 5 minutes of Q&A on average, and 5 minutes to get to the next session. And so one of the things to look for is the gong sound. Can we get us? There we go. So if you hear the gong, don't be nervous. That's not a problem. It's not like a fire drill or emergency or something. It just means that it's time to move on, and you can move to the next session. You can see the full schedule, first of all, online, if you want, at our website, marketplaceconf.com/schedule. You can also see it on the walls of the first and second floor, so outside there. Anytime you have a schedule question, just go look at the wall or check your phone and look at it online. YouTube, some of the folks who have been here, I'm just curious, how many of the people here attended the Marketplace Conference last year? Raise your hands. Okay, maybe about a third, 30, 40%. That's great. So for those of you who were here last year, you may recall that the sessions were posted online on YouTube after the event. And so we're going to do that again this year. And so we have a whole channel dedicated to the Marketplace Conference on YouTube. Feel free to check it out. That is only for the speakers who have given us permission, obviously, to post their sessions online, but most of them have. So that's a great resource, and I find myself going back from time to time looking at some of those sessions just because there's so much great content from last year, and I expect there'll be some more great content this year. VC founder one-on-ones. So we do have office hours connecting VCs and founders. Those can be whatever type of format you wish to use with them. They can be pitch sessions for 10 minutes each. They last 10 minutes. So you can pitch a VC if you want, or you can just chat with them, ask for advice, talk about your business, however you want to handle it, it's up to you. There are still, most of the registrations have already happened. However, there are still a few open slots left for Founder VC office hours. And if you're interested in signing up today and you haven't, you can go up to the third floor and sign up on the sign-up sheet, first come, first serve. If there are still sessions left over, which I kind of doubt there will be, but if there are, if you want even more than the 2 that people are getting, then if there are some left over, we're happy to fill them up. Some of you may have seen the email that we sent out with the networking information. So there's obviously a great opportunity to meet people in person while we're all here, but there's also names and email and contact info posted online. So if you go to, again, our website, marketplaceconf.com/networking, you can access the document that has people's information, and that's opt-in. So it's up to you if you want to make that, if you want to sign up for that and participate in that. What else? I'm with Autotech Ventures, and we focus on vehicles, but cars are one type of vehicle, and it seemed necessary to get some car racing video games for that reason. So in the lobby outside here on this floor, you will see a couple of car racing video games, no charge, and feel free to play those throughout the day. Lastly, we have at the end of the day we have a cocktail hour along with a live band. Hope you guys can all stay for that. And then on that note, I'd like to transition into our very first keynote speech, led by Roger Lee with Battery Ventures, and he will be kicking off talking about the state of marketplaces today. Let's hand it over to you, Roger. Thank you very much.
Dan, thanks so much. Yeah, definitely a round of applause for Dan. So just for folks in the back, move up to the front here. We won't bite. There's plenty of seating. I think people are going to be funneling in over the next few minutes here, so we have to kind of move the traffic up front. So as Dan said, my name is Roger Lee. I work at Battery Ventures. I'm thrilled to be here. Battery is one of the co-hosts, and it's a real privilege for us to partner closely with Dan and the Speedinvest, Dan, the Autotech and the Speedinvest teams to help put today together. I want to amplify one point that Dan made in his opening comments, that the number of attendees this year is almost 2 times the number of attendees that were here last year. And so as great as last year was, not only do we have a much broader audience today, but the quality of the speakers, the quality of the content is really second to none. And so our expectation is that not only are you going to meet some great people today, you're going to learn a ton from some of the best entrepreneurs, the best practitioners building their marketplaces, and come away a lot smarter about how some of the best marketplaces in the world are being built. So with that, I'm going to get kicked off here with the state of the marketplaces presentation. This is a ambitious topic to cover in an hour, let alone 15 or 20 minutes, which is roughly the time slot we have right now. And I'm going to keep it relatively high level. We're going to go through kind of some trends that are taking place in marketplaces and give you kind of a perspective over time as to how marketplaces have evolved. We'll talk about why marketplaces are creating value and why investors like Battery and Autotech and others are so excited about investing in marketplaces. So with that, we'll get things going here. This is a standard disclaimer slide all of us investors have to do. Our lawyers force us to do this. Yeah, right. I'll put everybody to sleep quickly. Now, so just quick snapshot on Battery. We are a 35-year-old venture capital firm. We manage roughly $7 billion. We have offices around the world, 2 here on the West Coast, 2 on the East Coast, 1 in London and 1 in Israel. Now, we're totally stage agnostic. So we do everything from investing in early stage entrepreneurs, giving them $500,000 or $1 million to help get their ideas off the ground, all the way up to a $50 or $75 million pre-IPO investment. So pretty broad in terms of the types of investments that we can make. So this is my favorite slide. And if I could leave you with one thing today, and you could zone out the rest of my presentation, just remember Battery loves marketplaces. And over the past decade, we've invested in over 20 of them. And you can see a list of them here. And they span a wide range of use cases, from e-commerce marketplaces like Wayfair and StockX and Groupon, to community and content marketplaces like Glassdoor, local services like Spot Hero and Angie's List and Wag. We've been very active in the travel space, both in the US and internationally. Companies like Hotel Tonight, Get Your Guide, Sabre. And then finally in financial exchanges and financial marketplaces, and Coinbase is a good recent example. So in aggregate, we've invested roughly $400 million. And if you include actually the investments that are currently under term sheets right now, this number will exceed $400 million in pretty short order. More importantly, we'll be investing at least this amount in the coming years. And this is a very, very important focus for us. And so if you're an entrepreneur, which I think many of you are, raising money for a marketplace, we would love to talk to you. You'll see my contact information and contact information from some of my colleagues at the end of the presentation. So this begs the question, why do we love marketplaces? Why do we invest so much in marketplaces? Why do other investors put so much money into marketplaces? And the answer is relatively simple. We look for companies that are fundamentally transforming the way that people live their lives on a day-to-day basis. Companies that help really change our behavior in really meaningful ways. And if you look at marketplaces over the past couple of decades, they've done this in spades. And I think the best way to describe this is to take a walk down memory lane and do a day in a life snapshot as to how the average consumer would live their life over the last couple of decades and the role that marketplaces have played. So we have here, we have Chloe. She's in her mid-20s. She's kind of grunged out. She's on her way to a Nirvana show in Seattle. And back then, if you recall, there were very few marketplaces that really had a meaningful impact on what we did. She might be buying or selling some stuff on eBay. She found a roommate on Craigslist or maybe an apartment. But the usage was pretty episodic. And she would use these services maybe a handful of times a year, maybe spend a few $100s or $1,000 during the course of the year. By the way, people in the back, come on in. We have to kind of make room for folks coming in here. But then you fast forward, roughly a decade later, we have Sarah, very, very fashionable. And at this point, marketplace services are starting to really play a more meaningful role in the average consumer's life. So in Sarah's case, she's using Yelp to get restaurant reviews, maybe getting her home through Zillow or Trulia, getting some good local deals from Groupon, and getting travel recommendations from TripAdvisor. At this point, she's probably a monthly user and is using these services much more frequently than in the past, and maybe again spending kind of hundreds or thousands of dollars per year. The real seismic shift, though, is when you fast forward. There we go. Fast forward to today, we have Tommy, 21 years old, and he would have a hard time living his life without marketplaces. In fact, he wouldn't even know what to do with himself. All of his transportation is provided by Uber and Lyft. He has no car. He probably doesn't have any ambition to buy a car. Most of his meals are being delivered by DoorDash. He's getting his groceries delivered by Instacart. All of his entertainment is coming from Spotify and Netflix. He's traveling the world using Airbnb, and he is a daily habitual user, and he's spending thousands of dollars per month and potentially tens of thousands of dollars per year consuming all of these services. And some of you in the audience, or maybe a little bit older than this, are saying, is this really what is happening? Is this really how the average 21-year-old lives his life or her life? And the answer is yes, it is true. And in fact, I'd argue that we're understating the impact that these services are having. I have a 14-year-old son, and his behavior actually isn't that different than Tommy here. He uses Uber and Lyft for transportation. He gets meal delivered to our house through DoorDash. He gets all of his clothes through StockX. And so these behaviors behaviors are being conditioned at a relatively young age, and you don't even have to wait until you're in your 20s to actually start consuming these. So these services are now becoming really embedded into our day-to-day lives, which then begs this question: what does this mean for us as investors and for many people in the audience as entrepreneurs? What are the conclusions you can draw by this massive shift in consumer behavior over the last couple of decades? And the simple answer is that it's created an enormous amount of value. And if we take another walk down memory lane in those three phases I just walked through, you remember back in the late 90s, the only marketplace that was publicly traded that created value for the entrepreneurs and for the investors was eBay. And this was an iconic event. At the time, it was seen as one of the great venture investments in history. And back in the late 90s, it was worth roughly $10 billion. Fast forward 10 years later, you had really the first meaningful wave of marketplaces go public after that. You had, Netflix and Expedia here in the US, and you had an interesting kind of wave overseas where the first set of international marketplaces went public. You had Ctrip in China, Rakuten in Japan, Mercado Libre in Latin America, Bookings Holdings in Europe. And in aggregate, that cohort of marketplaces is now worth $36 billion in the late kind of 2008 timeframe. So the total value increased by over 3x. So really, really meaningful. However, where it got really interesting is in the past decade. And during that time frame, over 20 marketplaces globally have gone public, and they're worth in aggregate more than $1 trillion today. And so it's increased by a factor of almost 30x. These are iconic companies like Alibaba and JD in China. You've got Takeaway and Just Eat in Europe. Many companies in the United States like Wayfair and Yelp and Etsy. And these businesses are fundamentally changing the way that we live our lives, the way we shop, the way we travel, the way we eat. And so these services are really embedding themselves in a meaningful way. But as significant as that sounds, the next couple of years are even more meaningful. And so in the next, call it 18 to 24 months, we project that roughly 8 marketplaces will go public. And you'll see them circled on here. Lyft is an imminent IPO. I'm certain, Uber, Airbnb, all of these other companies are going to go public. In the next 18 to 24 months, it's going to create another $250 billion and as much as $300 billion of value. So significant value creation is happening with marketplace businesses. And it just shows, when you build a marketplace effectively, you can create enormous wealth for the investors and for the entrepreneurs. So they've created value, and it's been a meaningful kind of economic event for investors and entrepreneurs. But how have they performed actually as investments? How do they compare to other technology investments you guys could start or we could potentially invest in? And the answer is they've done extraordinarily well. And so today we're launching the Battery Marketplace Index. This is an index of the 36 largest publicly traded marketplaces globally. In order to qualify, you have to be a marketplace, obviously. You have to trade on one of the primary global exchanges, and you need a market cap of $500 million or more. And as you can see, over the last 7 years, the marketplace index has returned 205% compared to 156% for the NASDAQ. And so significant outperformance, based on these very successful marketplace businesses. And again, just demonstrating that when a marketplace works, it can create a disproportionate amount of value. What's really interesting, though, is that this marketplace index is about to expand. I mentioned a couple slides ago, we have these 8 companies that are going to go public imminently, and that's a lot. But when you think about it in the context of all of the IPOs that are going to happen over the next 1 to 2 years, it's really compelling. So based on kind of market research and equity analysts' expectations, there's roughly 16 companies that people are projecting will go public over the next couple of years. Again, we talked about Lyft, Zoom and Pinterest have filed their S1s. Many of the other ones on this list are going to come shortly. So it said 8 of those companies, half of them are marketplaces. And I don't think I can remember a period in time where literally half of the IPO pipeline were marketplaces. More meaningful, though, is the fact that 85% of the equity value of this entire cohort are marketplaces. So again, it just goes to show that when you can construct a marketplace, it creates a disproportionate amount of value. These aren't unicorns. These are decacorns, if not bigger. And so if you're going to spend your time and energy constructing a business, your time is very well served by building a really successful marketplace. The markets, tend to reward you in a meaningful way. Okay, so why is all this happening? Why are they why are these services embedding themselves in our lives more frequently? Why are they creating so much value? Why are these businesses outperforming the NASDAQ? And the answer is simple. They are fundamentally doing a better job at serving the needs of consumers. And they're doing this by innovating along two axes. They're becoming more verticalized and they're becoming more managed. And we'll talk about both of those in the next couple of minutes here. But again, if we take another walk down memory lane and think about how marketplaces has evolved over time, they've evolved in a couple of ways. So again, go back to the 90s, this first cohort, the Angie's List and the eBays, the Craigslist, generally speaking, very horizontal, lightweight kind of matching platforms, just connecting supply and demand. The marketplace itself didn't do a lot. One notable exception was Netflix. They were obviously highly verticalized, trying to address the needs of consumers around entertainment. This is back in the day when they were shipping, DVDs around. When you go to the 2000s, the next generation of marketplaces started to become more verticalized. So they narrowed the segment of things that they would do, focusing on specific verticals like ticketing or homes or food. And then the marketplace itself started to take on more and more responsibility. It took on trust. It took on payments to provide a better service for both the supply and the demand. And then look at this most recent cohort, and they've taken it even to a further extreme. They've sliced the verticals in an even more narrow way, and they've taken on even more responsibility, in some cases actually owning the assets themselves. And you look at extreme examples like Lime and Bird and Opendoor, and we'll talk about them in a minute, and they've gone to an extreme where they actually own the physical assets in delivery of the service itself. And so over time, marketplaces have become, again, more and more verticalized to narrow the surface area of the solution they're offering the consumer and embedding more and more services into the marketplace itself. Now, over time, what's also interesting is that your position on this 2x2 isn't necessarily static. And depending on the nature of the competitive dynamics, it can shift over time. Grubhub and Netflix are two good examples of this. Grubhub in particular, they started life as a relatively lightweight platform to connect consumers, diners, with restaurants that would deliver food to you. Great value proposition. People loved it. In the last 5 or 6 years, though, with the emergence of Uber Eats and with DoorDash, they ended up taking on the responsibility of delivering the meal itself. And that opened up a whole new supply of restaurants that was not able to list on Grubhub. Grubhub was losing more and more share to Uber Eats and to DoorDash, and they were forced to respond by moving up the stack, taking on more services, and offering actual delivery themselves. And so again, you can move up and down these axes, and depending on how the competitive dynamics play out, you may need to in order to survive. So if you double click on this evolution, we'll talk about a few of the services that have been built in to enable kind of marketplaces to become more managed, to hopefully kind of highlight some specific lessons learned. Again, another walk down memory lane. Start with Craigslist, very shallow marketplace. We call it here unmanaged listings. A better descriptor would be chaotic, where really Craigslist did very little beyond just connecting buyers and sellers to consummate some sort of transaction. All of the risk was pushed off to the supply and the demand, and Craigslist really did nothing. It was kind of the Wild West. So buyers and sellers had to do all the communication, negotiate on price, handle payments, and it was a very, very difficult experience. But it did create liquidity, and it did create some transparency. So Craigslist actually solved the first primary problem. Evolved to eBay, and eBay, first of all, narrowed the consideration set a little bit. You're not going to find a roommate on eBay. You're not going to find necessarily an apartment on eBay. So they focused just on buying and selling. But where they really innovated is around reputation and on payments. And so they solved a fundamental issue about trust, where as a buyer, I could trust the person I was buying from through seller ratings. So that was something that they solved. And they embedded payments into the transaction. The transaction could be managed effectively online. Those two unlocks, solving reputation and payments, created a massive shadow market for eBay that yielded tens of billions of equity value. And the key lesson here, as entrepreneurs, is we'll talk about this in a couple more examples. What are the specific services you can build into your marketplace that unlock a shadow market and really create a de novo experience vis-a-vis the traditional, opportunity or traditional experience? In the case of eBay, they were modernizing what was happening at garage sales and at flea markets to create a global exchange. But to do that, they had to solve trust and payments, and that created tens of billions of value. In the 2000s, eBay started to really fragment the platform itself by trying to be all things to all people, became stressed, and a lot of the verticals got picked off where you could get a vertical marketplace that was a much more nuanced and much better solution to solve the needs of the buyers and sellers in ticketing or in crafts or in sneakers. And so this now has spawned a whole generation of vertical marketplaces, again, part of this general trend towards verticalization that can go deeper into solving the needs of the buyers and sellers. And this is still happening to this day. In parallel, you had a migration towards vertical search. So these are for transactions that weren't going to be consummated online. So you're not going to buy your house necessarily online, but you still needed vertical search in order to get access to the amount of data you need to make an informed decision. And companies like Zillow and Trulia did a great job in real estate. Yelp was doing it around local. And again, they embedded really important data to ensure reputation and trust for the search experience. Where things got really interesting, though, is over the last 5 to 10 years, where this most recent generation of marketplaces has embedded a ton of services into the delivery itself and has taken real responsibility for the actual delivery of the service the consumer is looking for. Uber, DoorDash, Instacart, and Lyft are the best examples of this. And this has created a seismic shift in the expectation of the consumer, where I push a button and literally, an Uber shows up 5 minutes later. The only reason that's possible is because Uber is embedding a ton of services into their platform. They recruit the drivers, they curate the drivers, they match us based on location, they handle payments, they handle pricing, they handle communication. That was unheard of 10 years ago. And that in itself has unlocked a massive shadow market worth, between Uber and Lyft, $150, $200 billion. And based on current estimates in the city of San Francisco alone, the size of Uber and Lyft is 10 times bigger than the taxi market was, prior to Uber and Lyft. So it just shows the power when you figure out the right services to embed in your marketplace, it can unlock these huge shadow markets and these huge opportunities to really change the way consumers live their lives. In addition, we have a really set of interesting innovations going on in asset-light managed marketplaces, and companies like StockX and The RealReal are innovating here by enabling kind of high-priced peer-to-peer commerce. Historically, if I was going to buy something worth $200, $300 on Alibaba, eBay, I'm getting the times up back there. I'll be quick. Alibaba, eBay, the amount of fraud that took place on those platforms was significant. And so it really stifled the amount of high-priced peer-to-peer commerce that was happening on those platforms. In the case of StockX and RealReal, they introduced an authentication step where the supplier sends the pair of sneakers, the Yeezys, to StockX. They validate they are in fact Yeezys, and they send it off to the buyer. The buyer doesn't even care who the supplier is because the product's authenticated. This is unlocking its own shadow market of opportunities for high-priced, kind of high-valued goods with explicit trust in a peer-to-peer marketplace. And then the final step in our journey are these asset-heavy managed marketplaces. These are companies like Lime, Opendoor, and Bird, where they actually own the physical assets themselves. Lime and Bird own the scooters. Opendoor takes ownership of the home, fixes it up before turning around and selling it. Again, all in an effort to provide just an exquisite experience to the consumer, but taking on a lot more responsibility and taking on a lot more capital to provide this service. So quick couple conclusions. The world of marketplaces is becoming much more verticalized, much more managed over time. You as entrepreneurs, I think, have to be conscious about kind of how you slice the vertical and then what services do you embed in your marketplace to provide a really unique experience and to potentially unlock these shadow markets, as we talked about with eBay and with StockX and with Uber. But it comes at a cost. If you go down these highly managed marketplaces, they can be very capital intensive and can be difficult sometimes they put stress on the business model. I'm actually going to talk to Miriam Nafisi from Minted later on today about her decision, how she kind of navigated this and trying to figure out what services to embed in her marketplace to kind of generate lock-in, but without creating too much capital intensity in the business. So I'll leave on a high note here. As great as things are right now and all the massive wealth creation that's happening for entrepreneurs and investors in building marketplaces, we're really just getting started. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, this number, the 1.3 trillion, is going to increase by, another 3 or 4x. The companies you guys are all starting in this room are going to make the current generation of marketplaces look boring by comparison. I hope, us at Battery, Autotech, Speedinvest have the chance to work with you guys. And by the way, your logos will definitely be on that last slide. This is my contact information, my colleagues, Jeff and Courtney's contact information as well. And thank you for your time. I'll hand it back off to Dan.
Thank you, Roger. Great overview of State of the Union and the Marketplace Union. I see we have a lot of people standing up and back. I think probably some people will end up remaining in back, but we've got probably half a dozen seats over here on this side and maybe 8 or 10 over on this side. If you guys want to come forward, feel free. I hate to see so many people standing up, also interspersed, so please feel free to come forward and sit down. All right, I already introduced myself. So I want to start with a quick overview and background on Autotech Ventures. And we are running a few minutes late at this point, so I'll try to speak quickly. Thank you for your patience. First of all, we focus exclusively on the global ground transportation industry, and we consider that to be a $3 trillion market around the world. There are many different pieces to it. We define ground transportation broadly. We look at, there's $1 trillion passing through dealerships alone, financial, insurance, logistics, aftermarket, manufacturing, vehicular manufacturing. There's just a lot going on. And it's a very large market and scope to play in, both domestically and internationally. So Roger touched on some of these dynamics before, but we are seeing that ground transportation is getting disrupted faster than ever before. Ground transportation is an old industry. The Flintstones had wheels. And yet, if you look at the last 100 or so years since cars and trucks were invented and started becoming mainstream, you see that just in the last 10 or 15 years, the rate of innovation and disruption has really accelerated. And it is happening faster than ever before. And in addition, much, not all, but much of the disruption and innovation that's happening is around marketplaces within the sector. So if you look at this graph, you see that the number of marketplaces that are increasing in the space and getting larger from an exit perspective. We've had over $40 billion worth of exit value in less than the last decade. And a growing percent of that has come from marketplaces and will continue to come from marketplaces. So that's why Autotech Ventures, as a co-organizer of the conference, is excited about marketplaces. We take a look at the vehicular life cycle when thinking about how and where to invest, and we start at the beginning from manufacturing. And we start thinking about what are the opportunities in the manufacturing space, and then from a pre-purchase perspective, how do people engage with that process? After they purchase the vehicle, whether it's a truck or a car or some other work truck or some other type of vehicle, what do they do with it? They drive it, they share it, they navigate using it, they park it. Ultimately, as the vehicle ages, they repair it and finally sell it. So there's a complete life cycle for a vehicle, and there are marketplaces that are disrupting every single piece of that life cycle. And by the way, in this slide, I'm including network effects businesses in my definition of marketplaces. So one of the trends that we're seeing is the gig economy. I think everybody's familiar with the rise of the gig economy over the last couple decades. It's becoming more and more a source of employment for a growing number of Americans and people abroad. People are drawn by the flexibility. But some of the Uber for X type companies involving, massage services or dog walking or marijuana delivery or whatever it may be, those are actually pretty small when you look at least from a valuation perspective, when you compare them to, for example, delivery drivers and some of the transportation players in this space. And in fact, in some cases, they end up competing for the same talent because of the flexibility of the employment. So one of the trends that we're seeing is growing movement of people to some of these larger delivery driver type companies and transportation companies in general. And that also, to us, speaks to a larger trend and movement towards transportation generally, both from a capital perspective and from an employment perspective. One of the interesting drivers of innovation has been the macro trend of mobile ubiquity, mobile phone ubiquity, and access to mobile apps. And this creates some interesting data network effects. And I think I apologize that defining some of these terms like network effects is, will happen probably throughout the day. I'm going to assume that people are familiar with these terms. But with regards to data network effects in particular, you see them enabled in many cases by mobile apps. And the thing about mobile phones is they enable both camera technology and also GPS technology and also connectivity to the cloud. And so some of these apps take advantage of these to create highly defensible businesses that are worth a lot of money by leveraging these technologies. So Waze is a great example of that. I assume everyone's familiar with Waze, but it's a traffic navigation platform. And with Waze, the more people who use it, the more information about traffic is communicated to the platform. And so it's a classic network effect. The more people use it, the more benefit everyone gets from the platform. And it's an especially powerful network effect because the data is always changing. It's a continuous real-time feed. And so it's really important that lots of people use it. It becomes more and more valuable the more people use it. So that's enabled by GPS functionality on a mobile phone. Another company called Cogniac has a different type of data-based network effect. The idea is that it can use mobile phone cameras to look at flaws in a manufacturing process or in a product and spot irregularities. And as it spots the irregularities and potential defects, it gets smarter about what those defects are and what they look like. And then that intelligence benefits not just that particular customer that's using it for that product, but all of the companies in the system that are using that shared platform. So that's another example of a data-based network effect where the more people use it, the smarter the system gets, and that ends up benefiting everybody. Lastly, you see some interesting innovations around insurance and leveraging mobile apps and the GPS functionality with mobile phones to make insurance risk models more accurate and more valuable, and theoretically to ultimately use that accuracy to drive down prices for everybody. And so that's another data-based network effect where the more people use it, the more data you get, the more accurate the models become. So all of these are data-based network effects that are driven by the increased utilization of mobile phones and clever applications of mobile phone technologies from a business perspective. I couldn't talk about trends in transportation without touching on autonomous, which is top of mind for a lot of folks. So with the U.S. government has kindly created this leveling system to give us a sense of different types and degrees of autonomous. And you can debate where we are, but it's roughly around level 2, depending on which company and which technology is rolled out. But basically, we have a long way to go towards full autonomous. I'm not going to make a prediction on stage about how many years that is. That's probably one of the most frequent questions I get asked. But we have a ways to go. That said, it is coming. Tons of R&D money is going into autonomous technology development. And the rise of autonomous will have a bunch of implications for marketplaces. So one of them is that startups are creating enabling technologies that will provide the foundation for future marketplaces. And autonomous will generate a lot of data. There's a ton of data created by cars as they drive around, and new marketplaces will emerge that leverage that data from a mapping perspective. There are fleet services that will leverage a lot of this data, and so on. In addition, autonomous will have a big impact on companies like Uber and Lyft because it fundamentally changes the defensibility and structure of their marketplaces. So right now, those marketplaces have drivers on one side and riders on the other. And when you have autonomous rolled out at scale, then theoretically, the driver side basically goes away. and so that really fundamentally reshapes the structure of those businesses and the industry. And by the way, this will not happen anytime soon. We're still a ways off from level 4 or level 5 autonomy where this is really possible. But when it does happen, it really changes the way those businesses are structured, because you don't need to recruit an army of drivers anymore. You don't need to recruit them. You don't need to retain them. It's very expensive and difficult. And one of the barriers to entry for a marketplace is the difficulty of successfully attracting both the supply side and the demand side. So the nature of that problem changes in a post-autonomous world where you don't need to attract a bunch of human drivers anymore. You simply need to attract the capital, the financing to buy a bunch of or lease a bunch of autonomous cars. So that can have a big impact on the industry. And then meanwhile, Roger touched on the micromobility space and the marketplace dynamics. And it's kind of interesting because I think an interesting question is, are those marketplaces? Because on the one hand, they demonstrate network effects. And the network effect that exists is the more, I'm just going to use scooters as an example, although there are other pieces of this. The more scooters there are around, the more likely anyone is to use a scooter. And it becomes more valuable with more scooters, and becomes more valuable with more users. So there is a network effect from that perspective. But all the scooters are in effect provided by one company or a small number of companies. And so in that sense, you're not attracting a bunch of drivers, for example, and there's not a go-to-market effort around attracting the supply side. You're not attracting multiple entities and bringing them on the platform, either consumers or businesses. So it, again, kind of like the post-autonomous world of Uber and Lyft, it becomes more of a capital financing dynamic around the supply side. One of the classic examples of marketplaces are the sharing economy, and the sharing economy is a trend that's been around for the last decade or so. But we think there's still a lot of life left in the sharing economy, and the sharing economy thrives with expensive fixed assets, and Airbnb works because your home is expensive. And in other situations, it would not work if, for example, you were sharing your toaster. Your toaster probably doesn't get a lot of use. It probably just sits on the counter most of the day. And so theoretically, you could share it. But the fact is, it's not expensive enough. It's not worth the friction of getting people access to it. And so that's why the sharing economy only works for expensive fixed assets. But there are still a lot of expensive fixed assets that can be shared. And so one of those is parking garages, and Spot Hero is a great example of that. Another is Bus.com, which makes charter buses available for that. So there's still a lot of, and these are both, the CEO of Spot Hero is speaking later today, by the way. These are both great dynamic businesses. I apologize because it looks like some of the slides have been fairly significantly truncated here. So one of the trends that I was going to highlight here is the transition from fixed locations and bookings to highly flexible services, and so we see that over the last couple decades where there are expensive asset-heavy models like Zipcar and scheduled rides on platforms like Zimride. And then in more recent times, there's been a transition to very flexible, lightweight models like UberX and micromobility, where the emphasis is on flexibility and sort of real-time instant gratification. And then in terms of the car marketplace evolution, we have an evolution from simple listings in the last few decades from Cars.com, and more recently peer-to-peer plays like Turo and Relay Rides. By the way, the CEO of Turo is speaking here as well very shortly. To a more asset-heavy dynamic with companies like BP. And BP was great from a consumer perspective, but didn't ultimately survive. And that demonstrated BP was a used car marketplace, and it took inventory of the car and provided a lot of services around the transaction. and ultimately the unit economics and other things became too much for it, and it succumbed. But overall, we see a trend towards a little bit more asset-heavy models recently, and more complexity from a financing perspective and from a kind of fintech optimization perspective. Most recently, there's a trend for cars as a service, and one of those. And some of those companies are offering subscription models for cars, like a lightweight lease, and some of those are asset heavy, and some of those are asset light. So those are probably still figuring out where they fit in the ecosystem. But overall, we're seeing a trend towards increased complexity, increased value delivered to the consumer as part of that, and also increased risk from an operational and investment perspective. So. That is the conclusion of trends in transportation marketplaces.